is the Victorian Country Hour with Warwick Long on ABC Radio Victoria.
Plans are afoot to make sure workers can help out with a massive grain harvest that is looming. Even Australian Defence Force retired personnel are being called upon for some help. We'll give you the details of that on the program today, as well as looking at some interesting things arriving through quarantine. And speaking of quarantine, there's a fight brewing between the federal and state government over how to get farm workers into Victoria. The federal government says they have the ag visa on the table. The state government says you can sort out how to quarantine them. And now it seems there is a deal to get more workers to go through Tasmania to get them into Victoria. That's sitting on the Victorian government's desk but hasn't been signed. The claim is it's been there for multiple weeks now. We'll try and get to the bottom of it today. You can tell us what you think about that by calling 1300 977 222. You can text as well, 0467 842 722. Up next, though, sad news is continuing with yet more dogs still dying from tainted pet food in Victoria.
The Victorian Country Hour with Warwick Long on ABC Radio Victoria.
Yes, dogs are still dying from the Victorian pet food contamination linked to the Maffra District Knackery in Gippsland. For years, Molly Patton and her parents from the Mornington Peninsula have been feeding their dogs what they thought was 100% raw kangaroo meat purchased in 10-kilogram bulk bags. But when both dogs fell ill about a month ago, they knew something was up. On Monday morning, and $16,000 in vet bills later, Molly's dog became the 26th dog to die from this contamination. She says tests found the pet food contained not just kangaroo, but also horse and beef too, with traces of the toxin indospicine.
Never in a million years would have thought that pet food would not be closely regulated and closely monitored to make sure that we're feeding essentially members of our family proper food that is safe to consume. This had happened in a supply chain with foods destined for human consumption. We'd seen it previously with the frozen berries, the needles in the strawberries. There'd be mandatory recalls, there'd be signs up everywhere, advertisements, possibly even litigation, and there's no legal discourse, there's no consequence for just this abhorrent negligence throughout an entire supply chain.
Agriculture Victoria and the Chief Vet have in fact closed the investigation into this contamination and no charges have been laid, but there are no regulations to lay charges against. Tell me a bit about the purchasing arrangement you had. You said you bought it in sort of 10-kilo lots, but you've been doing that for a long time?
Yeah, years and years. I can't remember the last time we fed our dogs dry food or a more processed pet food product. It's always been raw food. Bachmans have a wholesaler or a retailer in Seaford, which is close by to where I live, and we would call them up and place an order, and pre-COVID we would have it delivered to our home, and during COVID we would go and pick it up.
When were you first notified by the wholesaler or any other party that the pet food that you'd been purchasing for all these years could potentially be contaminated?
We weren't notified, and I think that's part of the shock of it all is we weren't called. In fact, we called them on numerous occasions after, by chance, my mum happened to come across a post on Facebook that flagged meat purchased from certain retailers between certain dates could potentially be contaminated and be dangerous to dogs, and to throw it out or call your retailer to check that it's okay. And that's exactly what we did. We called on multiple occasions to check that the meat was fine. On the first occasion we were told it's okay, it was only in beef and horse meat that the contamination occurred, and kangaroo was 100% safe to give our dogs. But they didn't tell us that the kangaroo was mixed with beef and horse. And I really hope they were unaware of it, because, that's just inexcusable in my books if they've knowingly mixed meat.
How do you know categorically that the pet food that you fed to Scarlett and Ruby is linked to the Indo-Spicine contamination. Did you get your own samples tested?
We took the meat samples to the vet as soon as they suspected that it was Indo-Spicine, and they passed the samples on to Agricultural Victoria, and I believe the tests were run both in Geelong at CSIRO and at the University of Queensland. They ruled out any other diseases. They ran an Indo-Spicine toxicity test and it came back positive. And they also ran like a protein analysis and it came back as not just kangaroo but as beef and horse meat as well. If anything good comes out of this, it would be to see the pet food industry regulated to the same standards as human foods, and to see those regulations audited and mandated to ensure that just this never happens again to another family or another dog.
I imagine it's a bit quieter at home for you in lockdown this week.
Yeah, it's been really hard. As I said, Scarlett's been by my side for 16 years. Sorry. Yeah, it's a lockdown has been really hard, but it's been better because she's been there and we've got to spend so much time with her. I run a small business and my clients all know her, friends, family, the whole neighbourhood knows her. She just owns whatever room or street she walks down, and she will be missed by a lot of people.
Oh, it's so tough to hear about people losing their dogs. Molly Patton speaking there with Kelly Lazaro, and a leading law firm is recruiting dog owners for a class action over the pet food contamination. Molly Patton and her family are yet to decide if they'll sign up. The Maffra has been contacted for comment. You're listening to The Country Hour. It is 12 past 12 now, and if you're looking for a job, you might want to keep your ears near the radio for the next few minutes or so. It's shaping up to be a bumper harvest in many parts of the country, meaning an enormous workforce will be required to strip the crop. But, of course, the usual international help isn't here, so who will drive headers, tractors and trucks? Well, under a proposal released today, retired servicemen and women are being asked to put up their hands and join Operation Grain Harvest. Australian Defence Force volunteers have partnered with industry peak grain body Grain Producers Australia to get the operation up and running. Angus Verley spoke with GPA Chairman and Western Victorian farmer Andrew Wiedemann, who says the response from the ADF has been overwhelming.
We're working on a range of things, to be honest, Angus, and this is one of them, and that's absolutely unbelievable, the response that we've received from the ADF. It's, quite humbling, really. I mean, these people have served their country and now they're at a time of need again, putting their shoulder to the wheel to help us to bring in what for some farmers could potentially be their biggest and best harvest ever if it keeps going the way it's going.
Just talk me through how it will actually work.
Yeah, so look, the connection points that we've got are really through the Facebook system, Angus. We've got a Facebook running in Western Australia, and then on the East Coast we've also got a Facebook page running as well. People can also connect through the GPA training website, which they possibly be familiar with now. They can log in there, an expression of interest and for people, and we can link them up, obviously, with farmers as well. So it's for both farmers to connect and also ADF personnel from right across Australia.
So I guess, Andrew, the problem with recruiting a workforce for the grain harvest particularly is that you're operating heavy machinery, and that's obviously not for everyone. But I suppose that means that Defence Force members that are used to driving trucks, tanks, whatever it may be, that they'll have those transferable skills potentially?
Yeah, absolutely, Angus. And that's what we've seen previously with the Qantas people as well, that they've been driving equipment. They pick things up quite easily. A lot of them are really process-driven because of their training. So it's very easy for them to basically be trained essentially on a header or a tractor to drive, or even in a truck situation, because a lot of them also have heavy vehicle licences as well.
We're talking here about retired ADF members, and when people say retired, you think of a certain age, but a lot of ADF members are retired quite young, aren't they?
Yeah, look, they are. I mean, they've obviously served the country, and in a range of scenarios, Angus, and certainly, yeah, for some that have retired early and, what we would think from probably a normal active working duty and really are able to try and re-engage in this situation. And you can only just think of the recent Afghanistan people serving in Afghanistan and coming back to Australia. They'll be looking to be re-employed, and this might be something that suits them out in the open air and working with farmers, on large equipment and bringing in, what again we hope will be possibly a record crop for the Australian grains industry.
So related to this proposal, you want the federal government to provide tax relief and concessions to incentivise those grey nomads, whether they be retired ADF members or other retired people, to get them into the harvest workforce?
Yes, that's correct, Angus. We believe that this is an area that's probably precluding quite a few people from being involved, and we think that this is an opportunity for the government to help, and we've certainly been getting some pretty favourable responses so far from our discussions with government, but of course that's got to spring into action sooner rather than later, with harvest probably going to start in about 5 to 6 weeks' time in Western Australia and certainly southern Queensland.
You're also hoping to tap into another area, another potential source of labour, aren't you, in terms of getting people out of rural businesses?
Yes, that's right. Yeah, so Angus, we've written to a range of the larger agronomist houses, I suppose, for want of words, and seeking them to release their agronomists and people over the harvest period. We've had some really favourable responses already from Nutrien around that. So we're looking, to the other agencies that are out there that we're writing to, seeking them to release their agronomists as well over harvest to try and help farmers. So we're looking at all avenues, Angus, and trying to keep the doors open. We're obviously thinking outside the square, and that's what we have to do in these times.
Just finally, Andrew, shaping up to be a massive harvest in lots of the country. You've got all sorts of proposals on the table. Do you think there'll be enough to ensure that the crop is taken off in a timely fashion?
Well, look, at this stage, Angus, we can only hope that what we're putting in place is going to help and assist farmers right across Australia. And yes, I believe that this could be potentially the largest harvest that we've seen, and financially as well, given the upturn in prices from overseas.
And just on that point about pricing, some grain growers are going to have a lot of money coming in this year. Do they also need to be prepared to pay a decent wage to attract workers?
There's no doubt that in times gone past that we've probably not paid in certain aspects what's required to continue to maintain a workforce. But I think, Angus, again, looking long term as well, we have to start looking at more fixed employees potentially working on farms. And again, it all goes with the seasons. And that's the good thing at the moment, is that we've got potentially a really good year on coming, but we don't know what next year holds. And of course, all these things come into the equation when you're looking at how you're going to make sure and maintain you're going to have a workforce going forward.
That's Andrew Wiedemann, Chairman of Grain Producers Australia, speaking there with Angus Verley. Already have a really interesting text in relation to jobs on farms from Catherine in Sale saying, "Hi Warwick, I have a 19-year-old son on his gap year. He's found his dream job, harvesting wheat in WA. He's proactively organised full vaccination, bought tickets, organised accommodation, and is now told there is absolutely no way he can enter Western Australia from rural Victoria. Levels of bureaucracy are failing us all." Catherine in Sale. If anyone has a job, they think Catherine's son harvesting wheat in WA was his dream job. I wonder if there's a few similar jobs around here. You could get in contact with us. Always send us a text, 0467 842 722, or you can email us, countryhour@abc.net.au. I'll say it again, countryhour, or one word, @abc.net.au. Happy to pass on things confidentially if you would like us to do that for your son, Catherine in Sale. Thank you very much for your text message all the same. You're listening to The Country Hour. We'll continue talking quarantine issues right now with the Victorian opposition and federal government saying the paperwork to extend the Tasmanian quarantine deal with Victoria for more workers has been on the Victorian Premier's table for 2 weeks and he hasn't signed it. Peter Walsh is the leader of the Nationals in Victoria, and he says the Premier has the paperwork. I spoke to him a short time ago.
So when the Premier went out and effectively slagged off David Littleproud, the federal minister, David rang me almost immediately once he heard what the Premier had said and said, it's on the Premier's desk as he understands it. It's been there for a couple of weeks. This is the extension to the Tasmanian solution. And he also said to me, I've got 400 people with visas in the Pacific Islands ready to come as soon as the quarantine issues are sorted out. For the Premier to say, that's all very well, but that's not my issue. Right at the start of the pandemic, the Premiers of Australia, including Premier Andrews, were absolutely emphatic that the states would be in charge of quarantine during the pandemic. So you can't have it both ways. You can't say, we are going to manage this, and then say, well, hang on, it's not my problem.
So why hasn't this deal to extend the Tasmanian agreements, why hasn't it been signed?
That's what you've got to ask the Premier. It's all very well for the Premier to say this whole thing's a fantasy, that the federal government's just grandstanding about granting visas. At least the federal government is doing what they need to do to get this thing to happen. It's now up to Victoria, and particularly the Premier, to do what he needs to do to make sure the Victorian part of the deal's done, so at least get those workers that come through Tasmania in here, let alone the bigger issue of that's just not enough people.
So both you and Federal Agriculture Minister David Littleproud believe the deal to extend quarantine with Tasmania is on the table of the government and it hasn't been signed by the Victorian government.
That's effectively the words that the Federal Minister, David Littleproud, used to me on Tuesday, I think it was.
That's hotel quarantine for Pacific Island workers looking to extend what's being done at the moment. There is the issue of the ag visa. David Littleproud says it's coming on September 30, so there will be 2 visas for agricultural workers, the ag visa and the Pacific Island Workers Scheme, but no plan in place to get either into Victoria as it stands.
And from Victoria, no, there's not. And I go back to what we've already said. At the start of the pandemic, state premiers, including Premier Andrews, were absolutely emphatic that the states were going to be in charge of hotel quarantine or quarantine for returned travellers or people coming from overseas. So you can't demand to have responsibility and then try and walk away from it and say it's not my problem. It is very much a Victorian government, Victorian Premier's issue to resolve to get those people into Victoria.
But if the federal government's the one to deliver the new ag visa, shouldn't they be the one to quarantine or at least have a quarantine plan attached?
But if the states have said, we are absolutely responsible, how can the Commonwealth override that? This is the conundrum we have in our federation at the moment that is showing up cracks everywhere, Warwick, whether it be the cross-border issues with permits, the lockdowns and different rules, this issue we're discussing now. It's actually families and businesses that are being impacted by all this lack of clarity, I suppose, and lack of a plan. 12 months on, we should have had a plan.
It's a pretty easy position for the Federal Agriculture Minister, though, isn't it, with respect? He says he has delivered an ag visa now with no quarantine plan attached, so it just falls into a fight with the states rather than getting a deal done to get the workers here.
The federal government's put a couple of $100 million into building a facility at Mickleham for the state to operate. So you can't say the federal government hasn't put skin into the game on this.
But can you see how people would be sick of the infighting, just wanting a deal done and not wanting to see more politicians pointing fingers at each other?
I can absolutely agree with that. I am as frustrated as everyone else. But, we've had the pandemic for 18 months now. This labour shortage issue has been around for more than 12 months. If you were the government of the day, if you were the Victorian government, if we were the Victorian government, if I was the Victorian Agriculture Minister, I would have set up a high-level internal working group right back 12 months ago and said, come back to me with a plan as to how we're going to get these people into Victoria. I don't want to know about what the problems are. I actually want to know what the solutions are. And I want my desk in 5 days, 7 days or whatever. Instead of 12 months on, we're having this same debate.
Is it going to be an issue again next year, do you think?
I can't see it disappearing quickly because we're running the issues of getting to a certain level, and there's going to be a huge national debate about how Victoria, Australia opens up once we get to the 80% vaccination, and that will include how we manage overseas travellers. So I can see it being an issue for quite a while, and we need the plan. Where's the plan? It's a simple question. Where is the plan?
Peter Walsh, thanks for your time.
Thanks, Warwick.
That is the leader of the National Party in Victoria and the opposition spokesman on agriculture, Peter Walsh, speaking about if there's a deal from Tasmania on the table for Victoria to sign to increase the amount of workers coming into this state, well, for quarantine of international workers to come into this state. The original 1,500 is now fully subscribed. I think there's one plane load of 100 to come, and that's it. That's already subscribed. Those positions are already taken. It's been a busy last half an hour. I've got some comments from the Victorian Agriculture Minister, Mary-Ann Thomas, on this, and I've also got comments from Federal Agriculture Minister David Littleproud. Let's start with the Minister for Agriculture, Mary-Ann Thomas, and her response. I've only got a statement. I'll read some to you now, and I'll quote, "The comments made by Mr Walsh are just plain wrong. We've proven we can coordinate with other states to provide a safe quarantine pathway. More than 1,400 workers have already arrived in Victoria to support our agriculture industry. Arrangements to secure a quarantine pathway for Pacific workers for the upcoming harvest season are being finalised with the Tasmanian and Commonwealth governments, and an announcement around this is imminent." It does sound like something's in the works there. But she does say that there is no deal. Well, the comments are wrong, I should say. I won't put words in the Minister's mouth. And I do have a letter from Minister David Littleproud, the Federal Agriculture Minister, to Premier Daniel Andrews. And it does say in it, and I'll quote, "I also note that that Tasmania has provided an offer of funding for the continuation of shared quarantine arrangements." So that's what each level of government and one opposition is saying in Victoria. I will leave it to you to decide who you believe.
On ABC Radio Victoria, you're with Warwick Long for the Victorian Country Hour.
Let's go to wool politics now. The triennial report on the performance of Australian wool innovation is out, and it makes for better reading for the organisation than the highly critical 2018 review, which came after the infamous Man in the Mirror scandal, where the chairman watched a research group from behind a one-way mirror without their knowledge. But it says there are still issues with the way AWI communicates with wool growers, and finds wool growers want AWI to do more to market the attributes of wool. AWI Chief Executive Stuart McCulloch says the review contains 14 recommendations on necessary improvements compared to 82 in 2018.
Well, I'm certainly pleased that it's not of the quantum that the 2018 one was. And, you know, we go into these things and are happy to go into these reviews, expecting that there are areas for improvement.
There was a very strong theme from my reading of the report around a lack of communication between AWI and wool growers. There was a survey saying that 56% of wool growers didn't know who their AWI wool grower industry consultation panel representative was. So what's going wrong there with the way AWI is speaking with wool growers?
Oh, that's particularly disturbing, because we have the Wool Industry Consultative Panel, the WICP, set up with groups that purport to be representative of wool growers, and that 56% of them didn't know who represented them in terms of the industry body is kind of alarming, because we rely on this group to feed us strategy and information from their constituents, and we rely on them to come to these meetings and disseminate that information that we provide them back to their constituents. So it's a two-way form of communication that we seek from industry partners.
But AWI is the organisation with the resources and the funding to promote what it's doing and to fund that communication.
Yeah, it is. We assemble this group, and we have another group called the WCG, which is made up of 28 groups. We've got to work out a plan to either expand that group so we get better coverage, or try and control the way that they're disseminating the information, because clearly their constituents, who they purport to be representing, don't know that they're representing them.
Governance was clearly a major issue in the 2018 report. This report finds that most staff are positive about culture within AWI, but that can still be improved?
Yeah, culture's one of those things you always can improve and chase after. It's an ongoing thing. It's there is no arbiter of perfect culture or half perfect culture. It's just one of those things we continue to work on. So we always recognise that can be improved.
83% of wool growers saying that they felt that the increased and ever-increasing reliance on China is a high or very high risk to the industry. Obviously, China dominates wool sales, I think taking around 90% of the wool clip. What can you do about that?
What a blessing. There is no other China. There will be no other China that has the climate, the population and the affluence to mass consume our product. Of the 90% they're buying out of the auction system, they're domestically consuming half of that, and it's growing rapidly. I understand the political tensions that are playing out in the background, of which we have very little control. We do have a market diversification program.
Moving on, also out today is the Walpole Voter Information Memorandum. Walpole coming up next month. AWI was under quite a lot of pressure from both industry groups and the Ag Minister David Littleproud to release this memorandum, including its justification asking wool growers to vote for an increased 2% levy. Why has it taken until now to release that information?
Oh, it's actually been released 3 weeks earlier than when it normally gets released, to be honest. So it's a lot earlier than scheduled. And we're happy to do that. This speaks to transparency. And
you're pushing for that 2% levy. That means money going from wool growers' wallets to AWI's bank account. You want that 2%. What response are you anticipating?
Oh, look, that will be the growers' decision. We've certainly got some challenges moving forward in the next 3 years, I believe. I personally believe that there are some significant headwinds coming our way. One, because of the change in spending habits of the consumer and the change in fashion. If you look at what's happening in North America and the UK, places like Wall Street and are going back to work, but they're not going back in suits. A hybrid working model. Now, if you had 5 suits and you were going to work 5 days a week, but now you're only going to work 3 days a week, that's going to have an effect on the worsted textile market and in turn wool. So that is a big issue for us. Suits is a product that consumes a mass amount of Australian wool, and we're going to find other alternatives and other areas where wool can function for the consumer. In the Northern Hemisphere, where we have staff, where we have offices, is going to have to be a big focus for the Australian wool industry moving forward. I firmly believe that.
That's CEO of Australian Wool Innovation, Stuart McCulloch, speaking there to Angus Verley. You're listening to The Country Hour. I'm late for news. Again, let's get there and find out what's happening around our state. Chris Tester's in the Bureau for us again today. Hi, Chris.
Good afternoon, Warwick. Shepparton's COVID-19 outbreak has grown to 67 cases, with 18 new infections recorded in the Goulburn Valley today. More than 16,000 people in the region have been tested in recent days. Australian Defence Force personnel are arriving in Shepparton today to support testing and compliance. Around a third of the city's population are in isolation, and authorities urging anyone with symptoms to get tested. The Unwin Street Preschool in Kyabram has been listed as a Tier 2 exposure site. According to the Health Department's website, 4 people in Merrigum near Kyabram have tested positive for COVID-19. The department says anyone who's visited a Tier 2 exposure site during the time listed online should get a COVID test and isolate until they receive a negative result. Shepparton's Rumballara Aboriginal Cooperative says there's been a concerning increase in vaccine hesitancy in recent days, but in an Australia First model, the Health Service has been offering to deliver the vaccine to elders and community members in their own homes. Indigenous residents have responded strongly to calls for testing, with almost 1,000 people tested through Rumballara since the outbreak began, but community leaders want vaccination rates to be higher. A Melbourne law firm is considering a class action against a Gippsland knackery over pet food contamination that's linked to the deaths of 26 dogs. Another 42 dogs became ill after eating raw pet food from the Maffra knackery, which contained horse meat with the deadly toxin indospacine, which caused liver disease in the dogs. The law firm Morris Blackburn is representing the pet owners and is seeking compensation. The lawyers are working pro bono for clients but will seek to recover legal costs. Victoria's Environment Minister's denied reports 100 jobs will go at the state's environmental watchdog. The EPA says its Waste Crime Directorate has been renamed following the new Environment Act coming into effect on July the 1st. There'll be a new chief investigator heading the dedicated Environmental Crime Branch, and some jobs created specifically to introduce the new act are being cut. And lastly, the Ballarat Agricultural and Pastoral Society has cancelled this year's spring show due to concerns about COVID-19. The organisers made the decision last night. While November's event won't go ahead, there are plans, though, to hold a series of competitions, including baking, arts and crafts and animal judging. The Executive Officer, Elizabeth Van Beek, says organisers are hoping farmers will support the decision. That's all for now, though. For more, visit abc.net.au/news or search online for your local ABC station.
Thanks, Chris. Chris Tester there with regional news headlines. And I can say, living in Shepparton, hearing those figures of what's happening and how quiet it is and what's going on, you can see a lot of that at the moment. The roads are incredibly quiet. It's almost eerie. And when there's no shops open in the evenings due to staff shortages, it does feel like you're living in another time, really, at the moment. So I hope everybody in my community is doing it safe. And a shout out to the people of Merrigum who are seeing cases happen in their community today too. I hope you're staying safe as well. Quick look in social media corner before we head to the Weather Bureau. There's just some figures that I saw today that I didn't know if we'd mentioned on the Country Hour this month, and it was from an AETHA report just on the Murray-Darling Basin and the value of the ownership of water in the southern Murray-Darling Basin, which is where irrigators in northern Victoria and southern New South Wales deal in the market, as well as South Australia. It says the value of that water now is at $26.5 billion in 2020-2021. And the value of the environmental water portfolio has now been valued at around $6.9 billion in the same area for the same period as well. Just some figures I thought you might like to quote around your friends next party. Hey, did you know $26.5 billion worth of water in the southern Murray-Darling Basin? There you go. Natural conversation. It's nearly $7 billion for the environment portfolio as well. Let's find out what's happening weather-wise around our state. Matthew Thomas is back with us from the Weather Bureau. G'day, Matthew.
G'day. That's a lot of money that water's worth.
Bit more than what the Bureau shilling out to its employees these days, is it, Matthew?
A tiny bit more.
How's it looking today?
Look, it depends on where you are about the state. If you're north of the Divide, it's mostly sunny conditions. But if you're on or south of the Divide, then cloudy conditions, and around Gippsland, wet conditions as well. We've got some rain still pushing into East Gippsland. We did see a good solid 20 to 40 millimetres, with some locations getting up to 60 millimetres through yesterday about East Gippsland. We are beginning to see that shower activity, the rain just sort of push into West and South Gippsland as well. And we'll see that continue with showers through West and South Gippsland through the remainder of today. But look, cloudy conditions through central and southwest parts of the state as well. But the showers through the central and southwest parts of the state will be more confined to the southern parts, in particular in the southwest around the coastal fringe. We're looking in terms of rainfall amounts, with most being about East Gippsland, around 15 to 25 millimetres there today, around 5 to 15 millimetres about West and South Gippsland, and less than 5 millimetres elsewhere. That's all driven by a low-pressure system sitting over the Tasman Sea and a high-pressure system that's just moving to the west of Tasmania, and will slip to the south of Tasmania this evening and just remain there through tomorrow while that low-pressure system just remains over the Tasman Sea. So a bit of a weakening trend in the pattern tomorrow, but the bulk of the precipitation once again through tomorrow will be about Gippsland. We're looking at around 15 to 25 millimetres still about East Gippsland, and around 5 to 15 millimetres about West and South Gippsland through tomorrow, but that should be beginning to ease through the course of the day, with just some isolated showers elsewhere on and south of the divide, but less than 2 millimetres in those showers. Will be a cold start, in particular north of the divide, where there should be some frost, and so we'll be issuing a frost warning for parts of the state north of the divide for tomorrow morning. Into Saturday, as that low pressure system moves away, that ridge of high pressure is the dominant weather pattern over Victoria. We will still have some scattered showers clearing in the morning about East Gippsland, but less than 2 millimetres expected in those showers. And we will see some showers just developing quite late about western parts of the state. Once again, it should be just less than 2 millimetres in those showers. Otherwise, a dry day. Once again, cold start, particular north of the divide, with some frost about and just some patches of fog. Those showers pushing into the west of the state late on Saturday as a trough approaches from the west, and that will cross Victoria on Sunday. Just seeing scattered showers extend to all districts of the state. We are looking at some falls of around 5 to 10 millimetres about much of the state. A little bit less about the Mallee and the northern Wimmera, where it's probably sort of 1 to 5 millimetres. But there will be some thunderstorms also about the southwest, the northern country and the northeast of the state, mainly during the afternoon. That trough will move away on Monday and a northerly stream will develop. And looking at the conditions warming through Monday, Tuesday, and becoming reasonably warm for the first day of spring on Wednesday, and Thursday warming up even further with the northerly winds freshening ahead of an approaching cold front that will cross on Friday. But we're looking at the possibility of 30 degrees about parts of the Mallee on Thursday.
And Matthew, I've got a text here, and I suppose as we talk about things warming up and spring starting to arrive, crops are starting to get a bit thirstier. Bob at Wareham, also northwest Victoria, says, when are we going to get some rain? It's dry. Is there anything on the forecast at all for the northwest?
Look, Sunday is probably the only precipitation really in the next 7 days, and as I said, that's really 1 to 5 millimetres. Unfortunately, the northwest is the area that does miss out a little bit with that precipitation. But if we actually go out 1 day further in the forecast period, just beyond the normal forecast period, it does look like a significant cold front does cross Victoria on Friday. And that's probably looking
Friday
like
next week.
Friday next week, and that's actually looking at the moment the wettest day that the models extend out for. Ooh. So, hanging out till Friday the 3rd, that's probably the next significant wet day.
Just when I thought I was out, Matthew, you pulled me back in. Something to keep an eye on for the next week or so. Brilliant. Thank you very much for the update. Any warnings we need to keep an eye on?
Look, there will just be the frost warning that I'll be issuing this afternoon for parts of the north of the state for frosts tomorrow morning.
Too easy. Thank you.
Okay, no worries.
That is the senior forecaster at the Weather Bureau, Matthew Thomas, taking us through the forecast for the next week and a bit. As you've just heard, something to keep an eye on next Friday. There might be a front coming our way. You're listening to the Country Hour, and I love this. As soon as I mentioned Joel, it's my fault. A couple of you are like, we need a worker. We even got some dairy jobs going. It's amazing. We might follow up some of these as stories as well. It just shows, I suppose, the amount of jobs that are open at the moment. If anyone's looking, feel free to get in contact too. We might try and match a few of you up. And if we're doing that, you've got to make sure your pay rate and conditions are quite good too. Don't want any of those stories coming back to bite you. Countryhour at abc.net.au is our email if you'd like to send us one. You can always text 0467 842 722. And I said, well, people are sick of the politics to do with who manages quarantine, how people get into the country, how people access workers. Well, apparently many of you are still quite into the politics because there's a lot of text in that regard at the moment. Some saying, here's Peter Walsh again playing politics. Another one says, needs to understand that we're in a pandemic. Where are we going to quarantine these workers? Well, that's what we're talking about, whether the deal is there with Tasmania or it's not. Bill's asking, why is the Minister for Ag missing in action? Why is she not beating on the Premier's door to get it signed? Lot of your texts in, lot of your thoughts to do with the politics of the situation. So maybe you're not as sick of it as I thought you were. It's 1:45 here on the Country Hour. Let's talk something way less controversial now, phone coverage. More than 2,500 homes and businesses in the Murray Valley will have better mobile coverage. It's under a deal with Australia's biggest almond producer, the Victorian Government and Telstra, to look to delivering a $3.2 million project. Telstra's Regional General Manager, Steve Tinker, says while it's common for telcos to work with state and federal governments, it's quite innovative to have an agribusiness involved.
It doesn't happen that often, but what we've seen with Olam, I think they're recognised as quite an innovator in the agricultural space, and I think what they've been able to do on their properties and with some of the technology and they certainly want to use technology to keep enhancing what they do, and they've built some towers on their sites for other things, and I think this is a very good way to utilise those partnerships and innovation together with the state government to bring services not only for Olam and the agriculture area, but for those communities in those regions as well.
So the plan will be for those base stations to use some of that infrastructure that Olam's already installed?
At a couple of the sites, yes, that's the plan, particularly up in that Annuella or that close to Weeman area and at Wondown. There's certainly got to be some more planning going to that, but that was the intention from the start. But there'll be new sites at Beverford, and we've got a small cell to provide depth of coverage into Wirran and South planned as well.
Olam has spent a significant amount of money improving connectivity on their almond farms. The company is already trialling autonomous almond sprayers and says it wants to identify other parts of the business that could also be automated. So having mobile connectivity is essential. Have you been hearing that from other farmers in the area too?
Oh, absolutely. I think the farming sector, the agriculture sector in general, are again very innovative, and they're looking for ways to keep adding value and to keep being more productive across the state and beyond. So, and what this does deliver, not only does it deliver cellular, 4G service to that area, but it also provides Internet of Things through our Internet of Things networks as well, which helps, again, to deploy sensors and other machine-to-machine type connectivity, which is really helping the agriculture sector and that innovation that sector drives.
If there are other large agribusinesses that are very eager to see connectivity improved in their area, is this a sign that there is that ability to collaborate and get some good outcomes?
Yes, absolutely. We're more than happy to sit down and work through innovative projects like this. We've got some co-investment money set aside for programs like this. We've been working with state and federal governments to deliver, and I think in Victoria we've delivered over 200 mobile black spot sites to date, and we'll continue to, and look for these partnerships to deliver more.
That is Telstra's Regional General Manager, Steve Tinker, speaking there about the deal between Olam, the big almond producer, as well as the Victorian Government and Telstra to improve mobile coverage there. You're listening to The Country Hour. Let's talk quarantine for a little bit, not in the way we have been with workers, but with things, with plants and animals coming through quarantine at the moment. Right now, there's a sacred sapling sitting in the lab at Australia's Quarantine Centre that's a direct descendant from the tree under which the Buddha obtained enlightenment. Yes, we're going to Buddhism here on the Country Hour now. It's a Bodhi tree sapling that has been brought from Sri Lanka and will be planted at the Great Stupa of Universal Compassion in Bendigo. This is Dr. Gabrielle Vivian Smith, Australia's Chief Plant Protection Officer, talking about the arrival of the sapling.
It looked a bit like a stick when it first arrived. It had suffered a little bit in the transportation. It was supposed to be escorted here by a special chaperone, Buddhists, and unfortunately COVID limited that, so it had a bit of a rough trip. But it was put in the glass houses, the quarantine glass houses, and provided some warm conditions, so hot and humid conditions, as well as some extra light to counter the short days of winter. And within a week in quarantine, it was able to sprout forth some new leaves, and it's now 1 metre tall and looking very, very healthy. It'll be there for 12 months, so we hope that we'll be able to release it in May 22. It's undergoing testing at the moment, so the importers did everything that they needed to do. They followed all the instructions, we provided a permit. It arrived as a bare-rooted sapling.
So why is this sapling so special? Annie Brown asked Ian Green, Chair of the Great Stupa of Universal Compassion in Bendigo, what it will mean to have the tree.
This story is the oldest living tree in the world with a known planting date. So when it was planted in Sri Lanka, it was actually all recorded, and there's a stone there that records the actual planting date. So we know it was over 2,000 years ago, and it's revered in Sri Lanka as the direct descendant of the tree that the Buddha was actually enlightened under 2,600 years or so ago. So that original tree that the Buddha was enlightened under had been destroyed by Mughal invaders and so forth. But fortunately for the Buddhist world, the Sri Lankan community, the Sri Lankan's community of Buddhist monks, had actually taken saplings from that tree, and then that sapling was replanted in Sri Lanka. And it's still there to today. It's actually guarded and looked after by a botanist. So the whole thing is protected as a living treasure. And we're so fortunate that, Bendigo is one of the few places in the world that has an official sapling from that particular tree.
Have you seen the sapling?
I have.
What does it look like?
I can't. I can tell you what it looks like, but I can't show it to you because it's under lock and key. Yes, it's maybe about 1 metre high, and it's flourishing. I mean, the thing about this particular fig tree is that it is not ideally suited to Victorian winters. We have to be very, very careful with frosts, but once it gets established and gets up a little bit higher, to be a few metres high, then it will be above the frost line, and it will be protected and will continue to thrive. It's being treated with as much reverence and as much security as it would be if it was back home in Sri Lanka. This tree is incredibly precious because it's it was an immense amount of effort that the team from the Sri Lankan Buddhists in Bendigo went to actually get the right to get this tree, all the travelling that went there, all the ceremony that went to actually handing it over and so forth. There was so much effort and expense went into actually obtaining this tree. But because it's of its direct connection to the Buddha, it's also, its value is much beyond money.
That is Ian Green, Chair of the Great Stupa of Universal Compassion in Bendigo, speaking to Annie Brown. You can see photos of that online, abc.net.au/rural. We'll go to the animal side of things and to those itsy-bitsy, teeny-weeny donkeys done with quarantining. A drove of miniature donkeys has just completed a period of isolation and testing at the National Animal Quarantine Facility in Melbourne. Angus Verley spoke with Lee Cale, Assistant Secretary for Biosecurity Operations at the Federal Ag Department, about the unusual arrivals.
They are quite miniature. So in terms of size, miniature donkeys are about half the size of a normal sized donkey, so fairly small.
I imagine quite the novelty for staff at the Mickleham Quarantine Facility to have miniature donkeys in their midst.
Yes, absolutely. They are very cute, but having said that, they still have the capacity to bring into the country pests and diseases that we don't have here and don't want here. So despite their cuteness, we do manage these quite closely and take this seriously. But certainly the staff at the post-entry quarantine station down here in Mickleham very much enjoyed having the donkeys in.
So, Lee, where have the donkeys come from and where are they heading to?
Yeah, in this latest consignment, we've had 7 miniature donkeys imported, so 6 females, which are called Jennies, and 1 male, which is a Jack. So 7 all up. In this case, these came from the USA, so Texas, Tennessee, and Kentucky. They will be heading out now, or have headed out into destined for places here in Victoria. So they're well on their way. They've undertaken their quarantine. They have demonstrated that they're not carrying any pests or diseases, and away they've gone into their home life now.
Can you just talk me through the quarantine process the donkeys have had to go through, both in their country of origin and here in Australia, and whether that is specific to donkeys or whether it applies consistently to all animals coming into the country?
Yeah, look, the quarantine requirements or the import requirements do vary depending on what type of animal is coming in. But donkeys are treated in the same manner as imported horses. So in this case, the donkeys, yes, did have to, as horses and other animals do, underwent pre-export quarantine where they undergo testing, they undergo a series of official government certification to demonstrate that they're free of pests and diseases prior to their loading for export to Australia. And once they get here, they then have to complete 14 days in our post-entry quarantine facility here at Mickleham in Victoria. And during that time, they're extremely well looked after by our staff for those 14 days. And then once they undertake their full quarantine period, we can release them.
What sorts of diseases have the donkeys been tested for?
Well, probably the main disease that we're concerned about when it comes to horses or donkeys is equine influenza. But there are a range of other diseases as well, pyroplasmosis, equine metritis, other diseases like that we certainly don't have here in Australia, and we don't wish to have that.
That's Lee Cale, Assistant Secretary for Biosecurity Operations at the Federal Agriculture Department, speaking with Angus Verley. Amazing, after we spent all this time talking about humans in quarantine, it is actually really nice to hear about the plants and animals coming through too, isn't it? We've got a couple of markets for you today. Let's start in Bairnsdale with the cattle market there. G'day, Brendan Fletcher.
G'day, Warwick. Numbers were similar at 190. That's 12 fewer, with the usual buyers operating in a dearer market in places. Quality was very limited, with cows representing over half the sale. The young cattle were mostly plainer lots. There was a pen of excellent bullocks in the grown. Cows lifted 15 to 25 cents, with processors loading cows for an estimated 7.69 to 8.15 cents a kilogram carcass weight. Heavy bulls gained 20 cents. Yearling steers with some finish sold from 460 to 476. Heifers to the trade 430 to 484. Grown steers and bullocks 430 to 475. Most light and medium weight cows 323 to 375. Heavyweights 332 to 423. Heavy bulls 310 to 342. This is Brendan Fletcher reporting for MLA.
Thank you very much for that, Brendan. Let's head to the Wagga lamb market now to find out what's been happening there. Good afternoon, Leanne Dax.
Good afternoon. Numbers jumped to 41,000 lambs and 10,600 sheep. Combined in the total are 18,000 new seasons lambs. Quality across some old trade and heavy lamb categories was mixed, but buyers threw plenty of money at well-finished lambs. New seasons lamb quality was excellent, with all grades selling to strong competition. Overall, trade lambs, both young and old, were unchanged. Heavy young lambs gained $2. Old lambs sold firm to $15 dearer for over 30 kilos carcass weight. New seasons 21 to 24 kilo, 188 to 266 to average 1,000 cents a kilogram carcass weight. 24 to 26 kilo, 251 to 279. 26 to 30 kilo, 274 to $316, averaging 987 cents a kilogram carcass weight. Old trade lambs 21 to 24 kilo, $173 to $269. 26 to 30 kilo, $250 to $339. Over 30 kilos carcass weight, $310 to $379. Young lambs to restock and feed, $129 to $182. I'm Leanne Dux for MLA.
Thank you very much for that, Leanne. And that's about all the time we have for you on the Country Hour for today. Remember, I've said it a few times today, but we'd love to get your emails on what we should be talking about, story ideas. If you're looking for a worker, apparently too, countryhour@abc.net.au is our email address, countryhour@abc.net.au. And a plug if you're looking for any extended listen to the world record barley crop, you can find that in our podcast feed, wherever you get your podcast.